Have you ever felt that strange weight in the air, that overwhelming silence, as though something unseen lurks just beyond your sight? It's as if the world around you is holding its breath, waiting. When the night falls and you're left alone in an empty building, how do you know if what's around you is real? How do you know if you're truly alone? What if the darkness isn't empty at all? What if, in the silence, something is watching, waiting for you to slip up? Tonight, I'll take you through 3 disturbing true stories from the night shift. The kind of stories that blur the line between reality and something far darker. Something that will make you question every strange noise, every shadow that moves when you're alone. Music swells slightly to create tension, then fades softly. Stay with me till the end, because these are the stories that no one dares to tell out loud. Until now. Let me start with a story from a woman named Emma. She worked as a janitor in one of the oldest hospitals in the city. It wasn't a large facility, but it had seen a lot over the years. Decades of patients, doctors, and the inevitable tragedies that unfold in a place where life and death intertwine. By day, the halls were busy, filled with patients, staff, and the usual noise of medical equipment. But when the night came, everything changed. Everything went silent. Emma had been working there for almost a year now, and the night shifts were usually quiet. She could only hear the occasional clinking of her cleaning cart as she moved through the halls, the soft hum of the fluorescent lights, and the distant buzzing of machinery. She was used to the routine. Her job was simple: clean the empty rooms, wipe the floors, and make sure everything was neat for the morning shift. It wasn't much, but it paid the bills. And besides, she found a strange comfort in the solitude. But this night was different. It was around 3 a.m. when Emma was finishing up on the second floor. The long corridor stretched out before her, bathed only in the faint emergency lighting. There were no patients, no staff, and not a sound in the air. She was alone, just like any other night. Or so she thought. That's when she heard it. A soft thud, coming from the end of the hallway. Emma froze, her mop hanging limply in her hand. The sound wasn't loud, but in the oppressive silence of the hospital, it echoed far too clearly. Emma whispering to herself, probably just the old building settling, right? But as she listened, the sound repeated, slow, deliberate. A shuffle, followed by a soft tap. Then again, tap, shuffle, tap. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest. Maybe it was one of the nurses. Maybe someone had stayed late to finish some paperwork, or perhaps it was a patient wandering the halls. She didn't want to be paranoid, but the thought of a stranger in the hospital at this hour made her uneasy. So, she gathered her courage and began walking toward the sound. As she approached the end of the hall, the sound stopped. The hallway was now completely still. No one was there. Emma sighed, half relieved, half disappointed. But as she turned to head back to the cleaning cart, something caught her eye. At the far end of the hall, just barely visible in the dim light, she saw a figure standing motionless, staring straight at her. It was a man, patient, a staff member. It didn't matter. What mattered was that he was standing completely still, facing her but with no expression, no movement. His hospital gown was torn at the edges, stained with something dark that Emma couldn't identify. His face was impossible to see. It was covered by shadows, as though his features had been erased from existence. The more Emma stared, the more she felt trapped, as if she couldn't look away even though every fiber of her being screamed at her to run. She finally forced herself to move, her feet dragging as she tried to walk past the figure. But as she approached, the man turned slowly, unnaturally, as if he wasn't just moving his body, but his soul was twisting as well. He took one step back, and then, just like that, he vanished into the darkness, like smoke in the wind. Emma stood there in shock for a moment, her heart thudding in her chest. She quickly turned to rush down the hall, but when she glanced at the security cameras, nothing showed up. No figure, no man, just an empty, silent hallway. It wasn't until later that she discovered something chilling. The same figure had been seen by other staff members in the past, but no one could ever explain who or what it was. The building's history was murky, and some of the older records mentioned incidents that were never officially explained. All Emma could do now was wonder if she'd encountered one of the lost souls who never left. Let's move on to a story from Daniel, a young man who worked the graveyard shift at a small convenience store just outside of town. It was a 24-hour place, the kind of spot you'd visit when you're running low on snacks or need to grab a drink after a long day. Most of the time, the shift was uneventful. He'd sit behind the counter, scroll through his phone, and occasionally check the security footage. Simple stuff. But one night, things took a strange turn. One that Daniel would never forget. It was well past midnight when Daniel first noticed it. He had been behind the counter, half watching the small TV in the corner of the store, when he heard the bell above the door jingle. He looked up, expecting to see a customer. But there was no one there, just the faint echo of the bell swinging back and forth. Daniel shrugged, thinking it was just the wind. But then, moments later, it happened again. This time, he stood up, thinking maybe someone had slipped in unnoticed. But the store was empty. He walked to the front door, checking the locks and looking around the lot outside. Nothing. The night was still, the streetlights casting long shadows on the pavement. He was about to return to his desk when something caught his eye. A shopping cart, sitting in the center of the store. Daniel whispering, "I didn't hear anyone enter. How did this get here?" The cart was filled with items. Random, scattered items, most of which didn't make any sense together. Chips, soda, cleaning supplies, and even a set of garden tools. None of it was placed in any logical order. And what unnerved Daniel the most, the items weren't in the usual brand packaging. It was as if they had been taken from other shelves. He walked over to inspect it closer, scanning each item, trying to figure out what was going on. Then, just as he reached for the first bottle of soda, he heard footsteps. Slow, heavy, like someone walking behind him. But when Daniel turned around, no one was there. His skin prickled as he looked around the store again. Everything was still, silent. Daniel, voice trembling. "Hello? Is anyone here?" Despite the fear clawing at his chest, Daniel tried to continue his shift. He checked the security footage, but the screens were blank. Nothing. No sign of anyone entering the store. He wanted to call the police, but he didn't know what to say. How could he explain something that made no sense? And then, as the clock neared 3 a.m., he felt the doorbell ring again. This time, more forcefully. It echoed loudly through the store. Daniel turned to look at the door, and that's when he saw it. The figure, standing just outside the glass. The silhouette of a person watching him. The figure was staring directly at him, its face obscured by a dark shadow. Without thinking, Daniel grabbed his phone and stepped back toward the counter. He was about to call security when the figure vanished, leaving only the faint sound of footsteps fading away into the night. When Daniel checked the footage once again, there was nothing. No sign of anyone. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was still out there, waiting, watching. And to this day, he still doesn't know if it was just his imagination or something more. Now, this last story is one of the most chilling I've ever heard. It comes from a man named Peter, who worked as a night security guard at an industrial complex on the outskirts of town. It was an isolated area, with vast warehouses and empty parking lots. The perfect place for an overnight job if you wanted solitude. But for Peter, it didn't stay quiet for long. It was just another ordinary night for Peter. He had done this job for years, and by now the routine was second nature. Patrol the premises, check the security monitors, make sure no one was trespassing. Simple stuff. The vast parking lot was almost always empty, and the quiet hum of the night was punctuated only by the occasional distant noise of shifting equipment or a stray animal moving around in the brush. Nothing out of the ordinary. Until tonight. Ambient sounds of footsteps echoing softly through empty hallways. The faint whir of machinery in the distance. It was around 2:30 a.m. when Peter first noticed something strange. He was doing his rounds through one of the older warehouses when he heard what sounded like a door slamming shut. His heart skipped a beat. He was certain that all the doors were locked. No one else should have been here. He immediately reached for his flashlight, the beam cutting through the dimness of the cavernous warehouse. As he walked through the aisles of old machinery and storage crates, the feeling of being watched crept over him. He paused, every hair on the back of his neck standing up, his breath coming in short gasps. Was someone else here? Or was it just the silence playing tricks on his mind? Sound of creaking metal, faint footsteps echoing, as if someone is walking just behind Peter. Peter moved deeper into the warehouse, his flashlight dancing over the shelves. The further he went, the more uneasy he felt. The sound of footsteps, heavy and deliberate, began to follow him. At first, he thought it was his own echo, but the steps were too consistent, too deliberate to be his own. He turned around quickly, but no one was there. The cold air in the warehouse seemed to press in on him, and for the first time in years, Peter felt fear. A deep, primal fear that something was terribly wrong. He continued his rounds, trying to rationalize it. It must have been a draft, a loose door somewhere. Or maybe his mind was just playing tricks on him. After all, it had been a long shift. But when he checked the security monitors, his heart sank. The sound of the security camera feed crackling, the tension rising. The monitors showed the usual feed, empty parking lots, hallways, and warehouses, but in one of the security camera feeds, something stood out. A figure standing just outside the gate. Peter zoomed in on the image, squinting as he tried to make out any details. It was a man, or at least it looked like one. He was standing perfectly still, not moving a muscle. His clothing was dark, almost blending with the shadows, and there was something about the way he stood that unsettled Peter. It was like the figure wasn't just still. It was frozen in place, as if it was waiting for something. Peter quickly called the security office, but no one answered. He cursed under his breath, unsure what to do. The figure outside hadn't moved for what seemed like hours. Desperately, he grabbed his radio and tried to contact his supervisor, but all he got in response was static. Then, suddenly, the figure moved. He turned his head to look at the window, and through the glass, he saw the shadow approaching the building. His breath caught in his throat. The figure wasn't walking anymore. It was running straight toward him, moving with an unnatural speed. Panic surged through Peter's veins as he fumbled for the keys to the nearest exit. But before he could reach it, the door slammed open. Sound of a heavy door slamming open, followed by the eerie silence of the empty room. And there, standing in front of him, was the figure. But this wasn't the same person he had seen on the camera. This figure was different. Taller, gaunter, its eyes hollow and dark, its face twisted into something that wasn't quite human. It was staring at Peter, not with malice, but with a knowing emptiness. A cold, unsettling calmness. You shouldn't have looked. Peter stumbled backward, his heart racing. The figure reached toward him, its long, skeletal hand outstretched. But Peter didn't wait to see what it wanted. He bolted for the exit, his mind in a frantic blur. As he reached the front door, he glanced back over his shoulder, but there was no one there. The warehouse was empty, silent, just as it had been before. Peter made it to the front gate and ran toward his car, never once looking back. He drove straight to the nearest police station, his hands shaking uncontrollably on the wheel. When he returned to the complex the next day with the police, there was no trace of the figure, no sign of any trespassers, no evidence of anything unusual at all. But Peter knew what he saw. He wasn't just imagining things. There was something in that warehouse, something that shouldn't have been there, something that waited for him. And though the police assured him it was just a glitch, a trick of the mind, Peter never set foot in that complex again. 3 stories of terror. 3 encounters that can't be explained away with logic. 3 experiences where the line between reality and nightmare is blurred, and something unnatural emerges from the shadows. These aren't just stories. These are real encounters with the unknown, the unseen, and the unimaginable. But here's the thing. What if you're next? What if it's not a matter of if, but when? Because, just like the people in these stories, you too could be walking through the shadows. Asterisk, and who knows what's watching you in the dark. If you've had an encounter of your own, something that you can't quite explain, I want to hear from you. Drop your thoughts in the comments below and share your story with us. I know you've felt it, the presence, the cold, that weight in the air when you're alone at night. Let's talk about it. And while you're here, don't forget to like this video, hit that subscribe button, and turn on your notification bell. Trust me, you don't want to miss the next chilling tale I've got ready for you. Stay glued to this channel, because the darkness has a way of creeping into your life when you least expect it. The stories will keep coming, and I promise you'll be waiting for the next one.